I beg to move that this House is considered the size of the British Army. Thank you, Mr Davis. It's a great pleasure to speak under your chairmanship. The subject of this debate is more relevant this week than many others. And after the NATO summit in Madrid, where the Secretary-General called for a fundamental shift in the alliance's deterrence and defence, there is an increasing realisation that British defence policy needs some urgent updating. When Russia began its bloody and brutal invasion of Ukraine, the world changed. Not only is it the largest armed conflict since World War II, but the rules and norms that govern war are being torn up daily by the Kremlin. All our thoughts and prayers are with the families of those killed and injured in the barbaric attack on the supermarket. And our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine today as they face even further hostilities. What should UK defence policy look like in the face of this new geopolitical reality? And the answer is an approach that reflects the new world we live in, where alongside our friends in Europe, we take more responsibility for our own defence and that of our allies across the world. There is plenty in the integrated review and the Defence Command paper that I agree with. Clearly, the Army must modernise, and the £24 billion to be spent on emerging technology would help us tackle new types of threats. However, the lesson from Russia's invasion is that we cannot continue to slim down the size of our army. We must be clear-headed, steely-eyed when it comes to assessing the threat we face from Vladimir Putin. This means a renewed commitment to our conventional military capability and an end to cuts. Certainly.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate you on securing this debate, but also agree with very much of what he's said, and I'm sure about what he's about to say. But on that point, would he agree with me that one thing that we're going to have to look at much more seriously now is putting more boots on the ground in other NATO countries, particularly those that face towards Russia and in the eastern parts of Europe?
Mr Davies, can I say I totally agree with that, and I think I got into some trouble in certain quarters when I said that early on in the conflict, and it was not something people wanted to hear at that time, but I certainly agree with that point. The Minister will know that I've consistently challenged the government over this. I have formed. Over the last 10 years, I've warned against cuts to the size of the army. In 2013, I said that cuts to capacity would seriously restrict the ability of our country to defend itself. In a minute. At the time, with the numbers of around 140,000, I felt as though we were retreating from being a significant player in the Western Alliance. Then, in 2016, the total went down to 100,000, Mr Davis. And there I was again in the House, warning the government that it simply was not the right course of action. Indeed, we are now facing the grim reality of soon having a limited capacity of 72,000 armed personnel. And the fact of the matter that these numbers are nowhere good enough for a key player in NATO. As the Minister will know, I usually engage in constructive criticism, but it is crystal clear that the government, or more specifically this Prime Minister, has his hands in the sand on this. I give way to my honourable friend.
Can I first of all congratulate the honourable gentleman bringing this forward? He's absolutely right. RAF figures are down, the percentage have fallen 6%. Army and Royal Navy have fallen 5%, so there's very clearly, since January 2021, so we do have a clear problem. We also have increasing demands upon our NATO commitments across the whole of Europe and elsewhere, and then we have Sweden and Finland also coming into NATO, which will strengthen us. Does the honourable gentleman feel that there may be other ways of increasing the numbers, and one of those may be through the territorial army and through the reserves? I know I've always campaigned, Mr Chairman, for extra soldiers to be set aside for Northern Ireland, where recruitment is high, but we haven't seen those numbers yet. Does he feel that might be a way of doing that?
I think my old friend really always intervenes on my speech. I think on everyone's speeches in a very constructive way, and I agree with so much what he says. But I will come to that specific point of recruitment in a moment. The Prime Minister, of course, may be seen as he's a great fan of Churchill. In fact, I picked up his book on Churchill for £1 the other day. I thought that was quite a bargain. And then they showed it on television and said, why have you got this book on your bookshelf? It's quite an interesting book, actually. But he's erecting a Churchillian facade. But the truth is, he's found himself at odds with NATO by reneging on his manifesto commitment. Quite clear. The commitment was to keep defence spending at 0.5% above inflation. He's given up on that, and it's not acceptable and puts us all at risk. In a minute. The Minister will know that I find the Secretary of State to be a breath of fresh air. I like him. I work with him, and I think he's a very good appointment. We agree on, it's the wrong party, but never mind. We agree on many fundamental issues, such as wanting to see the Prime Minister reform his approach to defence spending. The Secretary of State has rightly been calling for increases in personnel numbers, but however, this begs the question why the Defence Command paper was so quick to make these cuts in the first place. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I congratulate and commend him for bringing this very important debate to Westminster Hall today. But do you not agree that the very fact that we've been shrinking our armed forces for years has led to the encouragement of the likes of Vladimir Putin? So whilst welcoming the increase in spending to 2.5%, I question, do you, like me, question the timescale 2030? Is it fast enough? It's a long way off, and others might be tempted to be encouraged in the meantime.
Mr. Davis, I think harmony is breaking out in this debate, and I obviously do agree with that. Can I carry my narrative? These cuts will create gaps that will not be filled for years. New procurement can take decades to come to fruition, which leaves us all vulnerable to any future escalation with Russia, China, other parts of the world. I'm with the Chief of the United States Chief of the General Staff when he reminded us, can I correct that, Mr. Davis? I'm with the Chief of our General Staff when he reminded us you can't cyber your way across a river. It's crucial we maintain the equipment that guarantees our ability to defend ourselves and our allies. Mr. Davies, you might not know this, but I represent Huddersfield, where we have David Brown gears. They have for years made the gears for tanks, the Challenger tanks, for many of our marine craft. And so we have been a very proud player in providing the right kind of equipment for our armed forces. But can the Minister please tell us what plans he has to fill the gap when he cuts the Challenger battle tanks and the Warrior infantry vehicles, or when troop numbers are reduced from 72,000 to 72,000 in 2025? I hope he can give us an answer. Now, throughout my time in Parliament, Mr. Davis, and you will know this, and you will know that last week when I was here, I was at an air quality monitor on me, and this room isn't really up to WHO standards for breathing, so I tell everyone that that is the case. So throughout my time in Parliament, always devoted to evidence-based policy. The evidence from the Defence Select Committee is clear. We're in danger of having an army that is obsolete and outgunned. We are still years away from being able to field a war-fighting division, which itself would be hopelessly under-equipped. And if the British Army were to fight Russia, our men and women would be forced to go into battle in obsolescent armoured vehicles. These are not my words, but the words of the combined opinion of the Defence Select Committee. The government is now cutting our army on two fronts. First, by reducing numbers and equipment, and secondly, by completely failing to procure the military apparatus we so desperately need. This latter point is one of the most important. Over the last decade, we've seen a string of procurement disasters. Millions have been wasted with an embarrassing lack of results. And the MOD must learn from its mistakes and implement new processes for procurement, so not a single penny is wasted. I want to see increased spending on defence, but the public must be able to trust the government to extract money, especially, and I don't deny this, and I do not step back from this, Mr. Davis, that if we want to have more defence, that means someone's got to pay for it. whether it's in taxation or in any other way, or cuts in other departments. But the fact of the matter is, if the public trust us to spend the money wisely, it'll be a lot easier to increase taxation. So the government insists on cutting our current capabilities without procuring replacements. And this is a very worrying approach with very poor likely outcomes. Lord Richards, the former defence chief, has said that mass still matters, and cuts to personnel is an asymmetric attraction to one's opponents. Of course I would.
The Honourable Gentleman's making an excellent speech, and he's been a very long champion of our armed forces. I wonder whether he shares the concern that I have about the analysis that we sometimes get from the government, and we may hear from the Minister today, that when it comes to the size and structure of our armed forces, it's determined by the threat. The problem is, as the Honourable Member will know very well, we don't know what the threat is going to be next week, next month, next year. We certainly don't know what it's going to be in 3 or 5 or 10 years' time. Given that is the state of affairs, would the Honourable Gentleman join with me in urging caution when it comes to reducing the number of those who serve in our armed forces? They are our insurance policy. We don't quite know what's around the corner, and therefore we should be very cautious about reducing the numbers, particularly at this moment in time.
Mr Davis, the Honourable Gentleman, my honourable friend, will know how much I agree with that, and I was just going to come on to the fact that we used to, in every town and city, in Wales and in Yorkshire, all over the country, we had recruiting centres where people learned how to join the army, to get information, advice, all abolished. I'd love to see them coming back, because they offered a very good career and fine skills training to whole generations of people. Our allies, Mr Davis, just to conclude, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, has said that we risk not being able to contribute on the world stage if we continue to cut troop numbers. Under current plans, we would not have been able to act decisively in the Falkland Islands or have the strength to stop the genocide in Rwanda. And it's an imperative we build up this capacity to act in defence. There's no doubt the United States is not any longer willing to be the world's police person. The United States is tilting towards Asia, and so European nations like ours must take responsibility for our own defence. And to conclude, I have said technological advance, sorry, Mr Davison. As I have said, technological advance is welcome, but it's not a panacea. Mass still matters, and cutting troops is the wrong action at the wrong time. I remember those days of recruitment, as I mentioned earlier, and let's get back to recruiting more full-time soldiery. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has rightly united this House of Parliament. It has brought us all together. It's woken us up to the real threats to the peace of Europe. And it's shown this place at our best, working together, agreeing about the Russian action. But it's now time to unite behind a new approach to defence, where we stop the cutbacks, invest in our ability to defend ourselves and our allies. This is Britain's 1937 moment, and the West faces an uncertain future. Our defence policy should reflect this. Thank you, Mr Davis.